I'm going to walk through the Blackmagic Design Studio Camera 6K Pro and try to give you the kind of honest, down-to-earth perspective you need before you decide whether it belongs in your workflow. I know there's a lot of hype around 6K cameras and a lot of anxiety about spending a chunk of cash on a system that might end up gathering dust. So I'm keeping it real. I'll talk about the moments where this camera shines, the spots where it might trip you up, and who should actually consider pulling the trigger. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the biggest hesitation people have with a camera aimed squarely at broadcast is whether the Pro features translate into practical value for a smaller studio or a serious hobbyist. The Studio Camera 6K Pro isn't a compact point-and-shoot. It's built around a Super 35 sensor that records 6K RAW, and it comes with a full suite of broadcast-grade connections: dual 12G SDI, HDMI 2.0, timecode, Genlock, and a built-in tally system. In a live production environment, those ports let you integrate the camera into a switcher or a multi-camera rig without having to buy separate converters. For a production company that already runs a live stream setup, that eliminates a lot of extra hardware and cable spaghetti. On the flip side, if you're just looking for a plug-and-play camera for occasional YouTube videos, the same connectivity can feel a bit overkill. You'll need a proper power supply, an external monitor if you want to use the full 6K sensor window, and a decent lens to get the most out of the EF mount. That means the entry cost isn't just the body. You're also pulling in lenses, batteries, and possibly a cage or tripod with fluid heads. In other words, the value proposition hinges on how much of that ecosystem you already have or plan to invest in. Let's talk about ease of use. Blackmagic has a reputation for menu-driven interfaces that can be a little dense, and the Studio Camera 6K Pro is no exception. The touchscreen is 5 inches, which feels generous enough to scroll through settings without squinting, but the menu hierarchy does require a short learning curve. You won't be flipping through endless submenus for basic exposure. The core controls aperture, ISO, shutter, white balance are all on the main screen. However, digging into the more advanced broadcast settings like SDI routing or timecode configuration does take a few minutes of tinkering. If you've already used Blackmagic's DaVinci Resolve workflow, the terminology will feel familiar, but if you're coming from a purely consumer background, expect a couple of trial runs before the workflow clicks. Autofocus confidence is a common worry with larger sensor cameras, especially when you're trying to run a live talks how or a multi-person interview. The 6K Pro uses a contrast detect AF system that's been tuned for broadcast applications. In practice, it locks on fairly quickly when you have good lighting, and it holds focus well on a single subject that stays roughly the same distance from the sensor. The weakness shows up when you have rapid subject movement or when you're shooting in low-light conditions. The AF can hunt a bit before settling. For a studio environment where you can control lighting, that's usually not a deal-breaker. But if you plan to use this camera handheld for event coverage with unpredictable lighting, you might want to pair it with a follow-focus rig or go manual. Speaking of low light, the Super 35 sensor delivers a respectable dynamic range, about 13 stops, so you get decent detail and shadows without the image getting overly noisy. The built-in ND filter, 2, 4, 6 stops, is a practical feature for bright studio lights or daylight shoots. You can dial it in without swapping physical filters, which saves a lot of time on set. The camera does have a decent ISO ceiling around 12,800 before the noise becomes noticeable, which is plenty for most indoor productions. In an outdoor scenario with a fast lens, you'll still need to manage exposure carefully, but the sensor's performance holds up better than many entry-level cinema cameras in comparable price ranges. Stabilization is another area where expectations can clash with reality. The Studio Camera 6K Pro does not have in-body image stabilization, IBIS. That's a deliberate design choice because the camera is meant to sit on a tripod, gimbal, or rig for broadcast work. If you try to use it handheld for a vlog or run-and-gun documentary, you'll quickly feel the lack of stabilization. For that reason, the camera is best paired with a sturdy fluid head or a professional gimbal if mobility is essential. The trade-off is that you avoid the extra weight and power draw that a built-in stabilization system would add, which helps with battery confidence. Battery life is something I've heard a lot of people ask about with Blackmagic cameras, because many of their products rely on external power. The 6K Pro uses a standard LP6 battery, the same size you see in many prosumer camcorders. In a 6K RAW recording mode, you'll get roughly 45 to 50 minutes of runtime, which is typical for this class of sensor. For longer shoots, you'll want to run the camera off.